This will be an open conversation facilitated by Dr. Tarek Virani from the School of the Arts, University of West of England, between Polly Brannan, the Artistic Director of Open School East, Kieren Reid, Director of the Slade School of Art, and Gordon Knox, the board member of Res Artis. We'll just wait for the chairs to be established. And we'll do this. And Tarek's going to facilitate a conversation about changing the status quo, residencies, higher education and alternative pathways. We'll go for about 50 minutes, and then I'm going to facilitate the question part of that conversation at the end.
Excuse all the paraphernalia on me, I've just got a bunch of questions. Hi everybody, I'm Tarek Virani. I'm Associate Professor of Creative Industries at the University of the West of England in Bristol. Before I start, it'd be great if you guys could ask some questions. If not, I'm going to randomly pick people to ask questions, if that's all right. No? Okay, maybe not. All right. Yeah. I know a lot of you out there. Well, I know some of you out there, so I can pick on you anyways. Yeah, so I guess let me just introduce the session. It's about, and I'll just read this off the screen a little bit. So changing the status quo, residencies, higher education, and alternative pathways. I guess the thrust of the session, right, is about sort of exploring existing barriers to arts education and ongoing artistic practice. As we know, in this country and many other countries, the arts been under attack for a while, and we need to think about what that looks like and how it sort of permeates potential solutions and alternatives that we're thinking about. Looking at what's needed in terms of new models and programs, so including exploring free schools and unstructured peer-to-peer exchange, including residencies as well, and posing artist residencies as a viable and perhaps underappreciated alternative learning and professional development opportunity for artists. I also want to go a step deeper. I want to think about the sustainability of artist residencies and just thinking about the sort of, and we've heard a lot about the sort of the internal and external challenges that these organizations, I guess, face. And it'd be great to get into the sort of the details around what that looks like and think about potential solutions. I think that would be sort of the real, hopefully that's something that we'll be able to not deliver 100%, but at least discuss at this panel. And the way it's going to work is the panelists are going to have a 5-minute presentation, or they're going to try hard to keep it to 5 minutes because we've only got an hour. And so it's going to go, Polly, you're going to go first, and then Kieren next, and then Gordon next. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves and do their presentations. Thanks.
Hi everybody, I'm Polly Brannan. I'm the Artistic Director of an organisation called Open School East. We were established in 2013, first located in London. The original money came from Cultural Olympiad, kind of legacy money, which we'll talk about later. We moved to Margate in 2013 and now an NPO, so a National Portfolio Organisation, the Arts Council. We're on the lowest, amount of money that you get. And we are a free art school, and I think it's really important to say the context of what I'll talk about is in Kent, in Margate, which is a seaside town, which has a real history of tourism, especially before kind of 60s, and had a real decline and has kind of got a history of going up and down. It's in Kent, it's about an hour and a half on the train from St Pancras. Anyway, so we're a art school provision for young people, children and teachers now as well. We are dedicated to supporting people at all stages of their lives to develop, learn and produce high quality arts. We're an organisation that strives to create real change and impact on society by developing models of working that sees artists, communities, young people and children coming together on their own terms. So it's about really embedding this work and cultural offers in our neighbourhoods, but really thinking about it as a profile internationally for the artists that we work with. This is our building in Margate. I'm not going to talk about all the programmes in detail, but we think of the Associates programme as our kind of core programme, which is really a development programme, which people have described a bit like an alternative to an MA. It's a free programme for a year, and it's for emerging adult artists and cultural practitioners from diverse backgrounds, offering a critical, informal and non-competitive environment in which to develop just their work and their practice and networks. a public programme which they run themselves, and at the moment we work in partnership with Turner Contemporary, which is a brilliant large-scale international art institution in Margate. And we have a family programme called Despacito Art School, which is predominantly historically part of the Roma community in Cliftonville, but really it's for anyone that needs to access that provision. And a new kind of national and international programme developing real opportunities in the sector through you know, my networks and different networks of people that come to the organisations and guest artists to open up those networks to those associates. A very quick bit about history. So I think this is probably the most important thing in what we're talking about today. So it was set up not by me, by the founders. I took over in early 2021, but it was in response to what they talked about being the crisis faced by art education, the increased fees for higher education and resulting student debt that may increase the risk of access to arts education, making it inaccessible, particularly those experiencing social, cultural, economic, and I would say geographic barriers. The wider pressures of market-driven kind of product-orientated outputs versus a kind of more experimental, perhaps social practice, performance practice, was perhaps being discouraged more than a kind of commercial output in a way. So the programme was set up to create these alternative spaces for development, learning, providing free, critical and supportive education. I think it's important to say that we are a very small group, so it's completely different to an art school. It's 15 places which are free. And so a lot of the work we do, which I think is very, as being an artist well who's done residencies, we have a lot of systems in place because we're so small. We have to make sure everything is like vetted, sorted before people come. We offer studio space, but we don't have facilities. So we have a network of welders, clay space, you know, places that they can go and make work from, not just their studio. But a big part about Open School East is a curriculum that's developed by a professional artist, usually an international artist, and that opens up the kind of networks to the associates. And it's all about, in the first term, a kind of collective learning experience. So working together, not on their own studio practice, because they're kind of coming to art school, whether they're self-taught or they've done a BA, or coming to the arts later in life for many different reasons. But it's really about thinking about that collectiveness of making and developing new work. A bit like in the UK, we have a foundation year, which are sadly being shut, which will come up later, but which is a real avenue to be able to experiment and develop your practice. So these are just pictures of the kind of work that they do. We've had artists like Assemble, Anthea Hamilton, who are really brilliant artists that really support our students and become mentors as well. The public programme is developed through the associates. I'm just going to wrap it up, but it's really about, and I guess since I've taken over, my experiences as working as an artist, mainly in a kind of social practice, but I'm not only interested in social practice, but I think there's a lot of methodologies and learning that's really important for artists to think about in terms of how we embed ourselves in the places that we live and work. And I think that that's always the responsibility of the organisations rather than artists who may need to come in and out of that space, and that we create long-term community partnerships and networks in the sector that they can then feed into on a kind of yearly basis. And for the first time ever, we're going to be doing a social practice year, which means we're actually developing a programme and the curriculum, which is that lead artist inviting other artists and practitioners in a mental health care setting in Ramsgate, which is in Thanet in Kent. There is a big history of mental health issues and huge poverty in this area of the UK. And I think we talk about that quite openly in terms of access and people coming, and we also are historically known for our support for, not all of us, Brexit. It was, you know, worse than the Conservative Party. It was, oh my God, gone. What are they called? UKIP, here we go. So But, you know, it's many other things as well, but it's really important to talk to people, I would say not only non-white people, but people that are maybe not English. At the moment, I felt a bit that was talked about earlier, that it's not, we don't want to create this barrier between local audiences. It's from a level of higher up that's creating these systems. And so we do try and develop opportunities that really sees lots of different communities coming together to have kind of open conversations. A final show, which is kind of come to the end of the presentation. Each year we invite guest curators. This year we've had Maggie Matic from an organisation called Studio Voltaire, who brings in their networks, and they're at the moment working with artists at that kind of level. So it's really great that you see them go on to work with these curators. And unfortunately I have to go at the end, but I'm after this because of childcare things. I don't live in London. But it's really important to us at Open School is to really navigate and work within different systems like residencies, like organisations. So thinking kind of yearly ahead, who's coming in, what paid opportunities. It's really important for us. We can do online learning and create opportunities with artists across the world who might be coming. So it's paid opportunities, but it's great for us to develop those partnerships with you. So we're really open to that way of working. I should stop because, you know, it will go on and on. I just want to leave on my one thing. And these are different opportunities, the Young People's Programme. I'm just going to show you the images before rather than talking because I think they say more. And it's about training these artists to be able to do this kind of paid work and work within the organisation and go on to kind of work in the community education area, etc. And so it's always thinking, just to end on what is necessary here. So how do we ensure we're not just sharing each other's work? Who's here? Who can we work with? Who do we collaborate with? And where do we go from here? Where and what is the need? Where do we position ourselves? What makes an interesting and relevant cohort? What does arts education and support look like for different people? Remain agile and flex the model, and position ourselves in the wider education and arts sector to ensure access, roots, and that's the end.
Well done.
Sorry it went over.
It's all good. Perfect. Thanks, Polly. It's really so much to chew over there. And I just wanted to quickly say, you know, it feels like there's always this, you know, we're sort of always responding, or at least arts education is always responding to a national situation. It doesn't matter what country we're talking about. And so just thinking about, you know, these, like, is there a way that we can think about sustainability across the board as opposed to always responding to the pressures from some sort of national situation? I just think it's something really important to think about. But Kieren, go ahead, sorry.
Thank you. So hello, I haven't got a slide deck, but I think thinking back to the first day, if you can start imagining what's being presented as well, because you would have perhaps walked past the Slade as you came in through the quad this morning. But hello, I'm Professor Kieren Reid. I've been the director of the Slade since 2018, and I stepped down from this role early this month and will be taking a research sabbatical. I'm an artist and an academic. My art research focuses on sculpture, social practice, participation, agency, art pedagogies, and new technology. In the past, I've directed a non-for-profit art gallery with an international artists in residence program. And as an artist, I've co-designed with Publix and built architectural sculptures, which have been artists in residence studios and artist living accommodation. So the Slade School of Fine Art is a department of University College London, UCL, with a lively and dynamic practice-led research culture. The Slade is located on the left side of the main quad, which is very close to where we had our lunch today and where we're going to have our drinks reception later. Slade staff are practicing artists, writers and theorists with significant research outputs and exhibition profiles. We have around 260 students across the undergraduate and graduate in fine art courses, and there are also around 25 PhD researchers. Our talk programs are practice-based, and students develop their art through tutorials, seminars, crits, lectures, and workshops. There are staff, studios, and technical facilities for painting, sculpture, and fine art media. In 2025, the Slade will be starting a new undergraduate program, which is the BA Art and Technology, which will be located in our new studio in UCL East on Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park. So just I would say probably about a 10-minute walk from here east, where we were on Wednesday and Thursday earlier this week. The Slade is working towards realising its commitment to being an anti-racist art school which promotes a culture of care and respect for everyone in the department. We're committed to values of equity, diversity and inclusion. Our central focus is on creating brave spaces for those from marginalised backgrounds and communities. This includes supporting staff and students inclusive of all protected characteristics. The Slade's practice-led research culture facilitates an ongoing commitment to independent research while also supporting work with other artists, curators and researchers. And the Slade strategy going forward is to build on existing research priorities and place greater emphasis on collaboration, cluster-based practice research, focused on broader impact of art on society. We'll also continue to focus on our core themes of making, materials, sustainability, technology and well-being. The Slade research strategy will promote greater equality, diversity, and inclusion, and our strategic commitment to EDI will include ongoing critical reflection on historical and structural basis of inequality, institutional racism, and exclusion within art practice, education, and research, alongside practical implementations to improve diversity through collaborative research with academic and other institutions in the UK and internationally, to create equitable research and learning environments. The final element of our research strategy is an investment in partnerships with industry, galleries, museums, and other public institutions to enable formation of strategic collaborations, formal networks, cross-departmental and interdisciplinary research activity, and public engagement. And our research, innovation, and global engagement activities are centered around fostering knowledge exchange to create positive exchange in the wider world. Positive change in the wider world. For the past 6 years, the Slade Scientist in Resident program has invited UCL researchers from earth sciences, geology, archaeology, chemistry, and biosciences to collaborate on the Slade Materials Research Project. And we've also recently initiated a Conservator in Residence program in collaboration with UCL Institute of Archaeology. Since 2014, the Slade has annually enabled an artist from the Miro Foundation to have a studio in the Slade and provide them access to the Slade print workshops. We've worked with museums within the university and external organisations to provide residency opportunities for students. And this is, I suppose, part of a learning strategy, so students are aware of how they might work within an arts in residency programme. And we've worked with the UCL Art Museum, the Grant Museum, Heels, which is a department store, Trinity Boy Wharf, and Nutbrook Studios. In the past, we've supported and enabled international residencies for our students in Beijing as part of the Red Mansion Foundation, with Hong Kong Baptiste University and Bangkok University. And then finally, since 2008, the Slade Arts in Residency programme has seen 12 practicing artists provided a studio space and access to all our technical facilities. And we've had artists visiting from China, Thailand, Palestine, Indonesia, America, Japan, Malaysia. And hopefully this year we can invite 2 artists, and this will be the first time since the pandemic we've been able to do this, where we'll have 1 artist from the United Arab Emirates and another artist coming from China. Universities in the UK are closely regulated, and we are required to report on many areas of our work, in particular our research and our teaching. Specifically, graduate destinations are a really important metric, and attending an artist in residency is a great indicator of their professional development. On a personal, but also as when leading the Slade, I've been interested in how higher education can support the artist talent pipeline, how we can better support the art industry as a sector, and the conversation of universities working collaboratively with artists in residency programs, and how we can work together to understand each other and to help meet each other's needs.
Fantastic, thanks, Kieren. Gordon, do you want to go next? And then I'll start facilitating this conversation.
Polly, you've got the flicker? You got the flicker. Okay. Yeah. I don't know if it's going to go in a loop, but if it does, if you start to get back to the beginning, just go back.
Okay.
The idea is I have some examples of alternative artist residency type projects that we'll be flipping through, and you can grab a picture if you want to get the website. So the topic is barriers, new models, and alternatives. And just at the outset, I want to really suggest that artist residencies, as a sociological form, represent an alternative model to human idea exchange. It is, as we heard earlier, a location for deep dialogue. Or as Julie Lomax pointed out also earlier, it should be part of the educational experience for artists. When thinking about education, knowledge exchange, and artist residencies, I talked to my daughter, who is an avid reader of bell hooks, and she sort of said, come on, Dad, we know when we come to our knowledge through lived experience. It is embodied. It's like, duh. And that observation is absolutely clear, and it's absolutely what sets us up to enter into the concept and the place of a residency program. She went further to say, listen, if you don't think that's true, look at the inverse. She asks, how does the colonial gaze move into a place of knowledge? Only through disembodiment. So it is actually an act of resistance and self-empowerment to create our own knowledge and to create our own places of knowledge. And recognizing collective wisdom, its power, its gloriousness, breaks the imposed dead end that so many of the power structures we're embedded in seem to have set up for us. Universities. On the plus side, they are actually places that have the ongoing tradition of generational transmission of knowledge, which is really a requirement of species throughout the spectrum. And they're also a place for the production of knowledge. Research and investigation takes place there all the time, and they are, of course, a place for the distribution of knowledge. The lateral media, whether it's lecture halls, publications, or any of the electronic and social media platforms, so much radiates out of universities. But they are also institutions, deeply institutionalized, and they become instruments of dynamic reproduction of power structures. I mean, you don't have to think very hard to understand the role of class networks that are built up in and around universities and the bonds of allegiance that take place there. And for that matter, a profound sense of personal indoctrination. The individual identities are associated with universities, classes, where you come, and senses of exclusion and entitlement are embedded in the privilege of higher ed. So they are an important sociological location, and they are extremely effective ideological systems for the reproduction of power structures. It's good to remember that there's a bigger picture than power structures, because even within a university, what happens is the verification of knowledge takes place outside of the university. They take place over time, peer-to-peer review. The artist's artist is an example. Human meaning and empirical veracity all eventually undercut the power of these institutions. So let's think a little bit about alternatives. Artist residencies are in fact a true alternative. In my mind, they really are. They are an ad hoc, organic, temporary community of diverse creative thinkers and makers brought together for dialogue, discussion, and exploration. They are places of idea exchange and the intermingling of perspectives between equals exploring the universe. So together, the Res Artis group and the assembly of artist residencies around the world really are an important network constituting a now digitally capable of really having a dispersed, interconnected capacity to share the knowledge that takes place in these very localized, embodied, experienced moments. So that is basically my little blurb on alternatives and residencies and how they work with and without universities. There's lots of examples. I hope we'll get to them with the question and answers. We can go through the images if you want. There's the models that we have. One was this is the, hang on to that one. This is the Musiketti's project in Croatia. I came in, spent about 4 years at Stanford scanning the world for enlightened municipalities and then going to them and asking them if they had social issues or practical issues in their cities that we could address. If they provided me with a nice house and a place to put artists, we would engage the local artist community and address these issues. And we did this in Rijeka, Croatia, and built on the what side of it? On the left for you, we have Letitia Tsunami collecting stories of the older generation there, and then having them piped out on a park walkway so for people to enjoy. And on the other side, Matthew Mazzota, who came and realized there was this wonderful pier in Rijeka, but no place to swim, so he built a plywood beach. We can flip through them, I don't want to spend too long. This is a fabulous project in Eastern Senegal. This is a location built by the Albers Foundation, and working with the chef Pierre Thiam, we are working on developing a residency there that would engage foodways and chefs and cooking, and work with the local produce that was been made possible through these new buildings, and then connecting them to food and culinary experts and food pathway experts from different parts of the world. Can you give it a flip? Oh, good. Well, that's just another one of the same image. You can go backwards quickly, and we'll just see which ones we missed. Okay, so you can go one more back. Okay, this is the Woodman Foundation. It's a new residency just outside of Florence. It is very small, just 2 studios, ceramic-based, but deeply connected to the local art scene. So again, more of this. This is an interesting one. This is a 60-year-old MIT imprint art science magazine, a journal, Leonardo, that's partnered with the Jurassic residency program in the Bay Area. And it's designed to create a intersection between arts and scientists, very much focused on specific questions and issues. They actually come together, they come to a concern or an issue, and then they're given the residency to work on it. This is a fabulous long-term project. It's a 40-year project, a father-daughter team in Umbria using local traditions and Renaissance paintings to identify and hear about the various disappeared fruits and fruit varieties from the cornucopia paintings, and then through looking at the land holdings of the patron of the commissioner of these paintings, and using local high school kids and others to scan the territory. They've identified and preserved over 600 different vanishing varietals of cherries, pears, apples, and figs. So this is another sort of place where people come together with a concentrated effort. And, okay, one more. This is the one more, you can go. And this is truly a mobile, this is actually an art practice. This is Joel and Lisa who work out of this mobile, this trailer to explore stories about geography and working with communities. And they'll be on a site and up and down, in this case, they're going up and down the Gila River in New Mexico and Arizona for a 2-year period. They have a little ham radio station that's in this that they broadcast, and they create communities exploring stories and examining the use of the geography and the contestation and issues around water in this parched land. So these are just examples of how the residency model, connected to things such as social practice methodologies, can become alternative learning places of profound sort, and can really be an opening for truly diverse, broad, rich spectrum of perspectives, and creating their own knowledge and, in a sense, their own network. So that's about it.
Thanks, Gordon, that's great. So I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to try and facilitate a bit around this notion of barriers a little bit. And it feels like there's different scales of barriers that we're talking about here. We've got sort of local, I would say institutional, I would say international barriers and challenges. And I just wondered if we could think about that and what that looks like, and thinking about what you've all been working on and what those challenges and barriers look like with respect to your organization. And then maybe let's think about the next question I'll ask you after that is talking about alternatives and how they actually work. But Polly, do you want to go first?
Yeah. I mean, I think Open School East was sort of set up really to address some of those barriers, which, you know, it changes depending on geographically where we were in London. And I'm particularly interested in the context of being, I mean, this is a very hyper-local kind of conversation from where I'm coming from, but in that terms of where we're positioned in somewhere like Kent and East Kent in Thanet, you know, the more the social, economic and geographic is a massive barrier. So we have UCA Canterbury, but as I know from going to a regional art school, because I couldn't afford, I have student debt, but I couldn't afford to go to London and live in London, as well as my student debt and materials. So I understand what it means to be feeling completely disconnected from, you know, from London. And so what that means geographically across the country, the kind of divide between the north and the south of the country. So for me, it has been about creating spaces that are kind of really creating opportunities for people that are from that region, which is looking at an alternative pathway for them. But then nationally, it's also looking at the cultural barriers is something that came up a lot with our associates. So perhaps they may have done higher education, but perhaps they were encouraged more to be a doctor or law. So it's not always money, but it kind of comes back to that privileged position. And I think then, of course, that just goes into a much bigger conversation also internationally. So we've had an artist from Croatia who we supported with sorting out a house because the system wasn't working to home people in Ukraine, but I knew someone that did. So we can be quite agile in what that need looks like, and I'm really interested in that kind of artist at risk. We have an artist called Kenny Nakombi Kalongo, who's based in Brussels, but has not found that his education there is suitable for him and has kind of dropped out of education, but feels that this is a model for him. So it adapts to what it needs, but I think a big part always is just the amount of debt. And I think, as you know, the performance earlier of Tracy Emin, you know, that time has gone. There is no dole, there is no free education. So actually the precariousness of that debt and not knowing what you go into next is why the solution at OSE on a small scale. We come from working in the sector, commissioning, we know that Acme, we know Innova, we know these organisations, and supporting real kind of opportunities and placements straight away. And then the pastoral care is a really big part as well, that we find access needs around disability, addiction, people coming later in life, blah, blah, blah. So because we're small, we can actually have one-to-ones with each person. We know what it is. We know we can be transparent. We don't have an HR department. It's just me, one other person. I'm the only full-time member of staff. But we have incredible artists and people that come in, and that opens up the family of Open School East and alumni. And the last thing I would say is just a much bigger conversation, I think, is always needed around barriers. So somewhere like Thanet in Kent, in Margate, that's becoming this kind of super hipster art place, but actually there's only 9 hours a year in secondary schools. So in the UK system, that is appalling, and that's really, really low. So if we're not going to have artists, if there's no art in school, why would you even be able to access the idea of what art is? So I think there's a much bigger conversation across sectors, working closer with the commercial sector to really think about how we talk about contemporary art practice and how it's actually much more open to many different opportunities than we think.
That's a really good point. And I think what you were saying earlier, and I think it was in your slide about the disconnect between arts ecosystem and maybe even arts policy and what's happening on the ground and how it actually manifests is a really important point. And then maybe thinking about these different models of a response to that national situation, because it is a national situation and the actual effect it has on the ground is hugely important, right? So, like I was saying, and it's interesting with the UK government, because they go all over the world and they tell the world how incredible the creative industries of the United Kingdom are, but at the same time, with the same hand, they're slicing arts funding and sort of completely destroying arts education at the same time. So it's a paradox, and it's really intense. And I wonder how that kind of plays out with respect to the institution. So the university as well. So do you want to speak a little bit about that, Kieren? Or?
Yeah. So I think this is kind of considering this as a national sort of position, and I think Polly, you've kind of really touched in that as well. So I think it's similar sort of barriers that we experience. But just to give you an example, so since 2010, the qualifications for 16-year-olds, which is the GCSE, GCSE art entries or completions of the GCSE has fallen by 38%. And this continues to decline 3% year on year. And so this is, so if you consider that first pipeline of young people coming into the creative industries, the art industry is being cut at source. Then with that, as Tarek, you were just saying about the cuts from government, in 2021, fine art, design, our sector, our practices, was no longer considered as an important subject. And so that meant that the higher value to that to the degree was cut as well. So it was 100% cut off of a small amount, but that was sort of like the things that the university, the art school needed to work. And it also changed people's thinking about what was important within society and our discipline. And so when we start thinking about barriers, you've got this sort of like top level coming down, but also it's like, how do we communicate about the importance of art? And sometimes it can be the parents, which are a barrier for those young people to take a career in it. And we can talk really clearly about the benefit of arts education and how you succeed, the jobs you can get to. But it's like, who are the advocates within society who support and explain? We'll have lots of artists saying, study art, it's really important, but we need other people to kind of communicate that as well. And some things that we are trying to do to address that is, also another thing was the educational structures that we have in university as well, how we teach, and the need to evolve that as well, because they create a structural barrier, but also it's like, how do we do that, and what's the training for people teaching to be able to develop the learning platforms, tools, disciplines as well. And that's also kind of at UCL why we've looked at why we are creating the BA in art and technology, to kind of really address some of these things at the center, at the core of it. And so how we've been trying to address these barriers is through widening access programs. And this summer we had first time we've run it is a free to the point of access widening participation program for young people in London. And they had 2 weeks to come make art with us in UCL East, and that was supported through philanthropy, and Sadie Cole's HQ supported that. And so, but we also work with philanthropy to kind of find where we've got those gaps and how we fill that as well. So funding is a barrier, and then finally, it's like access to funding through research. It's very difficult to get research funding within our sector as well. And how do we do? And part of that is like how we work together to enable these sort of much larger sort of projects to remove those barriers so we can work together.
That's a really good point. Thanks, Kieren. Just to respond to that a little bit, right, before I come to you, Gordon, I was just going to say that, so if we take UCL East as an example, right, it's no coincidence that UCL East is situated where it is, right? The proximity to Hackney Wick, the history of Hackney Wick with artists that go back to the 1980s. I think the first synth pop bands started there in like the 1980s when it was it was basically a big marsh. So Hackney Wick has that. It has that sort of, I'm not going to say pedigree, but there is a history and a sort of artistic movements that start in Hackney Wick, right? And so what that automatically says to me is that having an institution like UCL East and Hackney Wick means that you're benefiting from the sort of intermediation that happens and the people that have that acumen, which is a really positive thing, right? And I think there's something about a question about what universities can do and what the people within the universities, i.e. the professors, the lecturers, the connections that they have to communities and what they can do and facilitate these sort of programs as well. Because like I was saying earlier, and I think we all agree, we're always responding to these policy mandates that come down from higher up, from government. And it's always difficult because it's not sustainable. And I just wonder, thinking about the international perspective, Gordon, are we, because you mentioned this thing about artist residencies being temporary. Is this a temporary thing, or is there a way to think about long-term sustainability and something that's more, I'd say, probably a little bit standardized across countries, if it is to be a viable alternative model?
Well, just to be clear, that the communities are temporary. You have a changing cohort of artists going through. The institutions themselves can be pretty stable. We have one here that we helped put together at the very end of the 1980s, and it became active in the early 90s, and it's still going strong, but you have cohorts running through. So that's the temporary community of creative people is with this. On the other hand, I think it's really to have an adroit and adaptable alternative to educational platforms. They can be very, very temporary, as in the Croatia project, which was like, really it started out at 6 months and ended up 18 months, but it's now gone. And then I think there's another way to go about things, which is like from the university out. I mean, it's possible. I started at the Arizona State University, a really special little short-lived 8 years residency program by basically hacking the system, figuring out a way to use my museum budget. I was the director of the museum to lease a building that was turned into 8 apartments with a gallery and a common kitchen. And it became a residency program which was focused not entirely, but to a large extent on the indigenous communities of Arizona and New Mexico, and launched some amazing projects by, Post Commodity was one, but a number of indigenous artists, as well as became a community center for that little neighborhood, which was a impoverished, largely non-documented Mexican or Latin population, and it really transformed the neighborhood. So it was temporary in the sense of 8 years, and it was a university funded, even though they didn't know it until they figured it out later. And but it was really a grassroots from the community up opportunity, and all we did was really provide the vehicle, the vessel, the place for it. So there's a lot of different ways that the human drive to create these communities of thoughtful exchange can take place.
That's great. There's something I'll just say before I hand over for questions from the audience. There's something about intermediation I think that's really important. I think in all contexts, this idea that individuals or organizations that can speak to the institutions they're within, or government, and also sort of local grassroots organizations. I think that connection, with respect to also agility, might be where we can see some of the fruits of these types of labors coming from. Anyways, pass over.
We have about 10 minutes left. Can we put the house lights on a little, please? Thank you. So we have some time for people to ask questions from the floor, which I can't see. Yes, the lady in the black and white shirt.
Yay.
Are we waiting for microphones? Can you turn these lights down so I can see the audience, please, a bit more? Thank you.
Hello, my name's Becca. Hi, thank you for that panel discussion. It was really interesting. Sorry, I'll tell you who I am. I'm representing Acme, an artist studio provider and residency provider, and I'm also an independent curator. My question is about still this sort of general feeling that the progression of being an artist is a process of ratification. And so alternative pathways are really wonderful for making connections and learning and developing your practice. But in terms of that sort of process of being ratified, I wondered if the panel had any thoughts on that, on kind of accreditation, basically. That's my question.
That's a great question. And actually, we had a discussion about this idea earlier, like this idea of potential standardization and accreditation for organizations like arts residencies. I'm going to pass it to you guys because you know more about this than I do, if there is.
It's something we look at often in, like, we run short courses, summer schools and things like that, and we often get asked, can we have a certificate afterwards? And it's like, what is that accreditation? The sector's changing, particularly within higher education, with access to funding across your life as well. How that looks where we have students who might be coming for a 10-week period of time, what that credits are. We have credits in our courses, so a 15-credit module, 30 credits. How many learning hours is across the year? I can explain to you how that translates across a year, but it's like how, like, that learning journey is often seen as like you study for a 3-year period and then you move on to something else. And they're the sort of things we're discussing how they need to evolve, but how that needs to be thought about in the wider ecosystem, I think, is really healthy. And we've also got degree apprenticeships as well, which are coming through, which are kind of, I have seen a link to industry more than art industry. So I think something needs to be looked at around there, particularly around where an artist in residency or a gallery or a museum with that links. But then we've got some risks also, if you go back further to that professorial model within the university, which is very patriarchal, things that we wanted to move away from, that we can't return to that as well. So I think it's checking ourselves and watching ourselves that we're not falling into this sort of hierarchical system that prevents those to access something which we're trying to be more accessible. So I don't think we can answer that, but I think this is all things we need to work together to sort of solve.
Thank you for that question. It's really relevant. So Open School East, we're not accredited. There is no, it doesn't have that. And I think that's why it's such a good point, because there are so many copycats of Open School East, not because Open School East is this cool thing, but because there is a need, because these professions, so people are getting funding to do a year-long program coming out of an arts organisation or New Bloomberg Contemporary, which is brilliant, but actually the issue with those is that they're not sustainable. The only reason that we get away with not having accreditation is because it's taken 10 years to build a reputation and to build that quality of being able to, because people need to say, oh, now it has that kind of, oh, you're an OSC, so, oh, we know that you had that particular type of learning, we kind of know what you're capable of, so it takes that long. And I think if we, we are at complete moment of, risk of closing in the next, we're not going to be able to do another 10 years. And my fear is, although I really advocate for temporal kind of spaces, but actually if we get rid of that and then the art schools are kind of falling, where does that kind of trajectory of actually training and support? You don't just become a scientist and you don't just become an artist. Yes, you can be self-taught, but to get to the next stage, you need development programs. So I think it's really important to think about long-term, and then that leads to sustainable models. So why we only think about sustainable models in terms of environment, but actually it's like we can't access funding to keep the same thing going. And if somebody who's advocated for something like Open School East is stepping away from funding that, the next person doesn't want to pick it up because it's a reputation thing of their own kind of baby, or a funder wants to fund a different model. But I think we need to get rid of this idea of something new and shiny.
Last thing, I just want to say something as well, because if we don't do something about that with respect to, let's say, the public sector, I mean, the private sector is already doing this. Like Sony has its own degree, I believe. I think Samsung is now thinking about having some degree programs around specific aspects of wider creative industries. So it's like, it's a no-brainer. Like, why aren't we thinking about this more and actually being a little bit more proactive around it?
Well, I'm just going to say, you're absolutely right. Higher ed is in absolute crisis, certainly in the States, and it sounds like it's the same story here. Late stage capitalism is the only sort of program that has figured out how to extract wealth from the youth's future. It's really, the loan process is really the ability to monetize the future of our offspring. No mammal does that, it's the other way around. So this is a real issue, and part of the problem is the accreditation system in the higher ed world in the US. So I was working on a model which would actually use a brilliant and wonderfully equipped art school as a sort of a celebrated residency program for artists. So there would be people in the photography, in the ceramics, in the sculpture, in the painting, and all these different facilities. And they could come in with a residency, which could be funded through fellowships, and they would develop a project, and they would be working with 10 amazing younger artists who are there to be with them in this process, almost an apprentice, but really also a collaborator. And they could be there for the beginning, for the conceptualization, for the funding, for the grant writing, the production, the documentation, the exhibition. And if they were doing this every 6 months with a new artist, after 4 years, they would have a smoking Rolodex. They would really understand how the place works. They would have a real deep understanding of the process of being an artist, taking an idea and realizing it. And without a degree or with a degree, it makes no difference really for that part. So in this case, just by dropping out of the accreditation system, we were saving over $2 million a year for the institution. Those savings could go directly to the students, all sorts of, really it's a model that's based on the organic human desire to move ideas from generation to generation and working from that. as opposed to these institutional forms. So I think there's a lot to be, it's a great question. I think there's a lot to be done with it.
I think we maybe have time for one more comment, but it will have to be quick. Does anyone? I blinded myself with the lights.
Hi, I'm Dani Prados. I'm an artist, and I'm also apparently a so-called provider from the Granite Falls Community Artist in Residence program in the United States. This is obviously a complicated issue and a very complicated landscape that adapts to the many, many factors facing each individual artist and how they fit into each residency, which fits into each program, which fits into each locale. Looking at these gaps between the resources that each of you need in order to sustain yourselves, both the financial, but also the volunteer hours, the community participation, finding spaces, finding non-financial resources as well as financial resources. What are you missing? How do you gather the information you need to prove the value that you offer to those individual stakeholders? And then what methods do you use to share those back?
Give me one answer, I think.
That's a huge question, right? I mean, okay, so I've always railed against the fact that we are, and this kind of relates to what Gordon was saying about late stage capitalism, that we are a little bit obsessed with this notion of consumption and actually trying to get correlations between what, let's say, creative people do and how that's viable, I guess, with respect to coffers, right, to financial budgets. Because it's not easy and it's not linear, right? We've all heard about how amazing what the arts does for communities, you know, how communities and the arts work together to actually benefit society. How do you quantify that, right, is the question. And it's a really difficult thing to go to policymakers and go to the higher ups in the UK government and parliament and say, actually, look at this, right? Because it just doesn't work like that, right? So what we end up doing is we end up being in a situation where Polly is doing what she's doing, right? And she's trying to be as agile as possible to make do and survive in a climate that is completely obsessed with outputs, with this notion of outputs, and how we think about that, as opposed to the process and potentially making our society a little bit better. But like I said, that's only one facet of it. It's a really complicated issue. But happy to talk about it afterwards, over a beer, I think, or maybe two, or maybe three.
I think we have to call it there because we have another artist presentation. So thank you so much. That was a really interesting discussion.